So we begin the section now on neurological function, and we're going to start with an overview of a number of different portions of it, from an overview of the nervous system itself all the way down to levels of neurons. So we have the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is essentially everything else, everything going to and from the spinal cord. And what's going to go directly to and from the spinal cord, or approximately to and from the spinal cord, are cranial nerves and spinal nerves. A nerve, by definition, is a bundle of axons in the peripheral nervous system. As we'll see, bundles of axons in the central nervous system are referred to as tracts. So we have pathways here that are ascending pathways. Ascending means going toward the central nervous system, so ultimately these are sensory things going to, for example, the spinal column. And efferent, which means away from, these are descending, that are going to innervate effector organs. What we're talking about there, smooth muscle or cardiac muscle or skeletal muscle is part of those particular structures. Peripheral nervous system is subdivided into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is considered the voluntary portion of the nervous system. These are motor and sensory pathways that are going to be regulating voluntary control of skeletal muscle. So you can see the afferent component that would control the contraction of the skeletal muscle, and then a sensory component that would be feedback then from that muscle. The autonomic nervous system, this is going to be the control of smooth and cardiac muscle. So here we have, as indicated, motor and sensory pathways regulating the body's internal environment through involuntary control of organ systems. This will be controlled or made possible by the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Each is going to be operating independently to maintain homeostasis, and then, as we'll talk about later, what can happen is one can ultimately take over for the other and cause a balance that are going to increase or decrease certain activities. In the peripheral nervous system, we have 31 pair of spinal nerves, so the names correlate with the level of the vertebrae at which they're going to be entering or exiting. These are mixed nerves, and what that means is they have both sensory and motor components. These will arise from anterior and posterior horn cells of the spinal cord, and you'll see that more in a bit. Then we have 12 pair of cranial nerves, and again, even though the spinal nerves are connected directly to the spinal cord, cranial nerves connected directly to the brain, these are by definition nerves because they are bundles of axons in the peripheral nervous system. These 12 pair are indicated here in this particular figure, and I imagine you've seen this at some point before. We would like you to know the cranial nerves from anterior to posterior along the ventral surface of the brain, and whether or not those particular nerves are sensory, motor, or mixed primarily. Now, by definition, motor nerves, as mentioned with the somatic nervous system, are going to have a sensory component, and these sensory components of primarily motor nerves are going to detect, for example, overcontraction or stretching of the muscle. So even though we say a nerve has or is motor only, there's going to be ultimately a sensory component to it. First, the olfactory nerve, that's cranial nerve 1, that's going to be carrying sensory information about odorants inside the nasal cavity to the brain. Cranial nerve 2 is going to be the optic nerve. The optic nerve is going to carry information from the retina of the eye. 3 is the oculomotor nerve. The oculomotor nerve is a motor nerve that's going to control extrinsic muscles associated with the eye, so moving the eye in particular directions. 4 is the trochlear nerve. The trochlear nerve does something similar there. Trochlear nerve will control muscles associated with the eye. You look over to the right, you can see the trigeminal nerve, which is cranial nerve 5. It has 3 primary branches. The trigeminal nerve is a mixed nerve. It's going to be carrying sensory information from the area of the face. For example, many of the toothaches one experiences can be carried by the trigeminal nerve. and also it's involved in muscle contraction associated with many muscles of the face, so involved in some facial expressions along with some other cranial nerves. Cranial nerve number 6 is abducens. Abducens will also control muscles that are associated with the external portion of the eye. Cranial nerve 7 is the facial nerve. Facial nerve will also control muscles associated with the face along with the trigeminal nerve. And then the facial nerve also receives some sensory input from areas of the face as well. Vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 8, as its name implies, it's receiving information from the vestibule, that part of the inner ear that's responsible for balance and detection of acceleration and deceleration or movement, as well as from the cochlea, so information regarding hearing. So a sensory-only nerve, cranial nerve number 8. Over on the right, toward the bottom, the glossopharyngeal nerve. The glossopharyngeal nerve, along with the facial nerve, is going to control the detection of gustatory stimuli, so those involved in taste, and also the control of muscles that are associated with the pharynx, for example. Cranial nerve number 10 is the vagus nerve. Vagus, we've talked about before, along with glossopharyngeal. Those particular nerves also control the baroreceptor reflex. Vagus nerve referred to in that particular way because it's the wandering nerve. It essentially goes everywhere within many portions of the thoracic and abdominal cavities. It is also a mixed nerve. So again, it's carrying sensory information to the nervous system from many of those abdominal organs, and then, for example, can control the contraction of many of those muscles. Number 11 is the accessory nerve, or spinal accessory nerve, controlling a number of muscles that are associated with the neck. And then cranial nerve number 12, the hypoglossal nerve. One of its primary functions is a motor-only nerve as well, controlling muscles associated with the tongue. So those are the 12 pair of cranial nerves. One should know them from anterior to posterior along the ventral surface of the brain, and also identify whether they are primarily sensory or motor, or whether they are mixed nerves. As we look at a nerve, and you can see an image of this, a drawing on the top right, and then a microscopic image there on the bottom right. A nerve is going to be, again, a bundle of axons, by definition, that will be in the peripheral nervous system. And these axons aren't just haphazardly bundled together. These particular axons will be covered up with something known as a myelin sheath, and we'll talk about that particular insulating substance in a moment. Then individually, these axons will be surrounded by what's called an endoneurium. Then these particular axons will be bundled together into what's called a fascicle, and a fascicle will be covered by a sheath of connective tissue known as the perineurium, and then a number of fascicles that are each covered by a perineurium will be bound by a connective tissue layer known as the epineurium. Here on the bottom right, we can see blood vessels associated with a number of different fascicles. You can see almost the entirety of 4 fascicles there in the picture on the bottom right, and blood vessels that are between and within those particular fascicles. A little bit more about the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is located in both the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Coordinates and maintains a steady state among the visceral internal organs. There will always be a balance between these two particular branches, as mentioned, the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. But again, one may take over in terms of magnitude relative to the other, depending on state. These particular divisions of the autonomic nervous system operate in circuits, and you can think of it as a 2-neuron circuit in which you have one neuron whose cell body exists within the central nervous system, sending out an axon to another cell body that's found in the peripheral nervous system. Collections of cell bodies that are found in the central nervous system are known as nuclei. Collections of cell bodies that are found in the peripheral nervous system are known as ganglia. So these axons, which are coming from cell bodies that are in the central nervous system, are going to be synapsing onto cells in the peripheral nervous system, and these cell bodies will be clustered in the peripheral nervous system known as ganglia. So the first axon, again, whose cell body is in the central nervous system, is referred to as preganglionic, and the second neuron, whose cell body is within that particular ganglion and whose axon goes to the target organ, is known as postganglionic. You'll see a picture of this in a moment, and you'll see some differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems in terms of the length of these particular cells and the types of neurotransmitters that these cells are releasing. Just know for now they are in a 2-neuron circuit, preganglionic and postganglionic. The primary job of the sympathetic nervous system, and I'm sure we've talked about it before, and you've perhaps heard the moniker associated with it, it is our fight or flight division of the nervous system, or controls this fight or flight response. It's not, again, only activated under conditions of stress, for example, but one of the things it will do is it will be increasing the activity of a number of things like heart rate, blood pressure, controlling the diameter of the pupil, shutting down activity of the digestive system, all things that help us ultimately to respond to stress. But remember, it's going to be active along with the parasympathetic nervous system at all times to maintain a steady state or homeostasis. The sympathetic nervous system receives innervation from cell bodies that are located from the first thoracic through the second lumbar divisions of the spinal cord. And that's where its particular preganglionic neuron cell bodies are located, in what's known as the thoracolumbar division. So from the first thoracic through the second lumbar portion of the spinal cord. These particular axons of these preganglionic cells will be synapsing with cell bodies that are located in a cluster alongside the spinal cord that are known as the sympathetic ganglia. You may hear them referred to as the sympathetic chain, or what's known as paravertebral ganglia, para meaning next to, collections of cell bodies that are next to and aligned with the spinal cord at those particular divisions. Here we see where the outputs of the sympathetic nervous system are ultimately going to be located, where they're going to send information to the second part of the circuit that's found in the sympathetic chain, and where these particular axons are ultimately going. Let's just look at a few of these in terms of the functions of these particular divisions of the sympathetic nervous system. So for example, in regard to heart rate, for example, we've already talked about what the effects of the sympathetic nervous system are going to be in regard to increasing the rate of contraction as well as the force of contraction of heart muscle, resulting in an increase in cardiac output. There are specific effects associated with the liver, for example, in which you can have an increase in glycogenolysis, and the list goes on. Again, the important thing to note here is where these cell bodies are located within the sympathetic nervous system, especially these preganglionic components, located in the first thoracic through the second lumbar divisions of spinal cord. The parasympathetic nervous system, its ultimate function is to conserve and restore energy, so the rest or repose response, as it's sometimes referred to. This receives innervation from cell bodies that are located in the cranial nerve nuclei, as well as the sacred region of the spinal cord. So note, there's nothing in cervical, thoracic, or lumbar divisions of the spinal cord. They're only receiving innervation from cell bodies that are located in craniosacral divisions. These preganglionic neurons are not going to synapse or make contact with cell bodies that are alongside the spinal cord like those in the sympathetic nervous system. What these axons are going to do is they will travel to ganglia that are very close to the organs they innervate. So for example, there is